Imagine, if you will, the most powerful man in the world. A man who was not merely a king, but a king of kings, an emperor whose vision and ambition forged the largest empire humanity had ever seen. His name was Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, and his power seemed as absolute as the heavens themselves. His decrees shaped the known world. His armies were a tide of steel that had drowned empires, and his name was spoken with a mixture of awe and fear from the shores of the Mediterranean to the mountains of the Hindu Kush. Now, imagine that same man, the architect of an age, utterly defeated. Picture his grand ambitions for eternal expansion shattered in a single, brutal afternoon. And finally, envision his severed head, the very vessel of that world-changing ambition, being contemptuously plunged into a wineskin filled to the brim with blood by a warrior queen he had fatally, arrogantly underestimated. This is the famous and undeniably brutal story of Queen Tomyris of the Massagetae. Welcome to Chronicles of Old Tales, where we journey back to explore the epic sagas lost to time. It is crucial to state, right from the beginning, that the true circumstances of Cyrus the Great's death are a profound mystery, a historical puzzle that scholars and historians continue to debate to this very day. The ancient world left us with several conflicting accounts, each painting a different final chapter for the great king. But the most enduring, the most dramatic, and certainly the most unforgettable version, the one we are telling in its full, bloody detail today, comes down to us from the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history. His account is not just a record of events. It is a grand, theatrical tragedy of hubris and revenge. It is the story of a nomadic queen who, pushed beyond all limits, delivered a terrifyingly personal form of justice that would echo as a warning through the ages. This is the legend of her vengeance. We must transport our minds back to the middle of the 6th century BC, a time when the world trembled before the might of the nascent Persian Achaemenid Empire. At its absolute center stood Cyrus, a figure of such monumental stature that he seemed more myth than man. He was a peerless military genius, a political visionary who had, in a whirlwind of brilliant campaigns, conquered the ancient and powerful kingdom of the Medes, subjugated the fabulously wealthy Lydian empire of King Croesus, and humbled the seemingly impregnable, thousand-year-old city of Babylon, absorbing its vast territories without a protracted siege. His empire was a colossus astride the world, stretching from the sparkling Aegean Sea all the way to the tributaries of the Indus River, encompassing dozens of peoples, languages, and cultures under a single, ordered rule. They didn't call him the Great for nothing. His armies, led by the legendary 10,000 immortals, seemed invincible, a perfectly disciplined and seemingly unstoppable force. His resources felt endless, drawn from the treasuries of fallen kings and the taxes of 100 nations. And his ambition knew no bounds. It was a fire that could never be quenched. After securing his western and southern borders, Cyrus, from his grand palaces in Massagetae, turned his gaze eastward. There, beyond the civilized, settled lands of his empire, lay the vast, untamed, and windswept steppes of Central Asia. This was the home of a fierce and proud confederation of nomadic tribes known to the Persians as the Massagetae. To Cyrus, a man who redrew maps with his sword, they were simply the next piece on the great board of geopolitics, a territory to be colored Persian red. He believed their lands, their resources, and their queen would be a simple, almost trivial, conquest. It was a fatal miscalculation. He could not possibly have been more wrong. The Massagetae, a people of the horse and the bow, were ruled by a queen named Tomyris. According to Herodotus, who serves as our primary and most vivid source for this incredible tale, Tomyris had assumed sole leadership of her people following the death of her husband, the king. She was not a queen in the Persian sense, accustomed to the lavish palaces, intricate court etiquette, and walled pleasure gardens of Babylon or Susa. Her throne was the saddle, her palace was a sturdy yurt under an immense, open sky, and her kingdom was the endless sea of grass. She was a product of the harsh, unforgiving, windswept plains of Central Asia, a warrior queen leading a nation of warrior horsemen. The Massagetae were a Scythian people, renowned and feared for their mastery of mounted warfare. Every man was a born rider and archer, capable of firing arrows with deadly accuracy from a galloping horse. They were a people who valued freedom above all else, above gold, above comfort, above life itself. Their society was a finely tuned machine built for survival, mobility, and warfare, forged in the crucible of a harsh environment and steeped in ancient traditions. Tomyris was the living embodiment of this spirit. She was not just a figurehead. She was a proven strategist, a respected leader who commanded the fierce loyalty of her clans, and a ferocious protector of her people and their way of life. Cyrus, who often, and wisely, preferred to use diplomacy and political maneuvering before resorting to open warfare, first attempted to absorb her kingdom without a single drop of blood being shed. It was his standard, highly effective method of expansion. He dispatched a high-ranking envoy across the river Araxes, the traditional border of the Massagetae lands, carrying with him a formal and flattering marriage proposal for the queen. He praised her renowned strength and beauty, framing the proposed union not as a conquest, but as a noble alliance between two great sovereigns. It was an offer that would, he suggested, join their peoples and spare them the inevitable horrors of war. But Tomyris was no naive desert chieftain to be dazzled by the wealth and power of the Persian king. She was a shrewd political operator who had survived and thrived in a world of tribal conflict and brutal pragmatism. She saw the proposal for exactly what it was. This was not about love or even alliance. It was about annexation. It was a gilded cage. To accept Cyrus's hand in marriage would be to accept his authority. She would become a subordinate, a satrap in all but name, and her proud, free people would be reduced to mere subjects of the Persian Empire, their lands absorbed, their warriors conscripted, and their freedom extinguished. Her rejection was absolute and unequivocal. She saw through the diplomatic charade and sent Cyrus's envoy back with a message that was both a refusal and a warning. She would not be his wife, and her kingdom would not be his prize. Her blunt refusal was a public and political insult that a man like Cyrus, accustomed to getting everything he wanted, could not stomach. His preferred method of sophisticated political maneuvering had failed spectacularly. So, he turned to the method that had never failed him before: overwhelming brute force. He gave the order. The vast, multinational army of the Achaemenid Empire began to mobilize, a river of men and steel flowing eastward towards the lands of the Massagetae. He marched his massive army to the borders of her territory, fully prepared to take by force what he could not acquire with a veiled proposal. As his corps of engineers began the monumental task of constructing a bridge of boats to ferry his army across the wide and fast-flowing Araxes River, Tomyris sent him one last, chilling message. Herodotus reports her words as a direct challenge, a final plea for reason. "King of the Medes," she said, addressing him by the title of his first great conquest, "I advise you to desist from this undertaking. Be content with ruling your own kingdom in peace, and allow me to rule mine." She urged him to call off his unprovoked invasion, to turn back before the threshold of her home was crossed. But then, she added a defiant challenge. If, however, he was pathologically driven by his lust for conquest, if he was truly determined to test the strength and resolve of her people, then he should stop his laborious work on the bridge. "If you are so eager to make a trial of our strength," she offered, "let us withdraw 3 days' march from the river, and you may cross over unopposed. Or, if you prefer, you do the same on your side, and we shall cross to meet you on your lands." Cyrus, the king of kings, the conqueror of the world, did not even deign to reply. He conferred with his council, and swayed by the advice of the vanquished Lydian king Croesus, who now served as his advisor, he pushed forward. He was about to make the single greatest mistake of his monumental life. Cyrus's initial attempts to establish a beachhead in the territory of the Massagetae were met with ferocious resistance. Small-scale skirmishes and probing attacks were expertly repelled by the swift and deadly tactics of the nomadic horsemen. The Massagetae warriors, appearing as if from the earth itself, would strike with lightning speed, shower the Persian formations with arrows, and vanish back into the steppes before the larger, more cumbersome army could effectively respond. Frustrated and forced to rethink his strategy, Cyrus, on the advice of Croesus, devised a plan rooted not in honorable battle, but in cunning and deceit. It was a trap that preyed on cultural ignorance. He commanded the bulk of his army to stage a convincing, panicked retreat, leaving behind a hastily abandoned camp. But this was no ordinary camp. It was a Trojan horse of a different kind. Cyrus ordered it to be intentionally stocked with his army's finest provisions: roasted sheep and cattle, piles of fresh bread, and most importantly, an enormous quantity of strong, undiluted wine, set out in fine bowls and flagons as if for a grand feast. This was the bait. Soon after the Persians' feigned retreat, a contingent of Massagetae soldiers, numbering about a third of their total force, discovered the abandoned camp. Leading this group was none other than Spargopizes, the son of Queen Tomyris, a young and eager commander. Believing the mighty Persians had been routed by their initial successes, they entered the camp in a state of triumph. They saw the lavish feast as the spoils of a great victory and began to celebrate with abandon. The Massagetae were a people of the steppes. Their customary drink was fermented mare's milk, a beverage with a relatively low alcohol content. They were utterly unfamiliar with the potent, undiluted wine favored by the Persians, a powerful intoxicant imported from the vineyards of the Zagros Mountains. They drank it not by the cup, but by the bowlful, and soon the entire war party, including their prince, collapsed into a deep, drunken stupor. Then, in the dead of night, as the Massagetae lay helpless, Cyrus's elite forces crept back to the silent camp. The Persians fell upon the incapacitated warriors. The slaughter was swift and merciless. Those who were not killed in their sleep were taken prisoner. Among the captives, bound and humiliated, was Prince Spargopizes himself. When the news reached Queen Tomyris, news of the cowardly trick, the slaughter of her warriors, and the capture of her only son, she was consumed by a cold, unquenchable rage. The grief of a mother fused with the fury of a betrayed queen. She immediately sent a herald to Cyrus, her message practically spitting with contempt. Herodotus gives us the substance of her scathing address. "Bloodthirsty Cyrus," she began, her words dripping with scorn, "do not be so proud of what you have done. You have conquered my son not by your strength in open battle, but by treachery, using the fruit of the vine, a substance which fills you Persians with such madness that you speak evil words. It was by this poison, this guile, that you have mastered my son, not by fair combat." She then moved from indictment to demand. She ordered him to release her son immediately and leave her lands in peace. And then she delivered a warning, a vow that would seal both their fates. "I swear by the sun, the sovereign Lord and God of the Massagetae," she vowed, "that if you do not do as I say, bloodthirsty as you are, I will give you your fill of blood." Cyrus, arrogant in his victory, simply ignored her threat. He believed the campaign was all but won. In captivity, Spargopizes eventually awoke from his drunken haze. When he understood the full scope of the disaster, the loss of his men and his own humiliating capture through intoxication rather than valor, he was overcome with an unbearable sense of shame. For a warrior prince of the steppes, such a disgrace was a fate worse than death. He begged Cyrus to order his guards to unchain him. Perhaps seeing a potential political pawn, Cyrus agreed. But Spargopizes had no intention of living with his dishonor. As soon as his hands were free, he drew a hidden blade or seized a guard's sword and took his own life. The news of her son's suicide reached Tomyris, shattering any faint hope for a peaceful resolution. For the queen, this was no longer a war to defend her kingdom's borders. It had become brutally, intimately personal. A mother's profound grief had hardened into an ironclad, unbreakable resolve for apocalyptic revenge. Stories like this one, of powerful women and defiant leaders who stood against the mightiest empires of their day, often become mere footnotes in the grand narrative of history. Here at Chronicles of Old Tales, we believe these stories need to be brought out of the shadows and told in their full glory. If you agree and want to support our journey into the past, please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more tales of forgotten heroes, epic battles, and legendary figures. And we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments what other historical figures or epic events you believe deserve their own full story. Fueled by a mother's volcanic rage and a queen's righteous grief, Tomyris marshaled every remaining man, woman, and child capable of holding a weapon. There would be no more skirmishes, no more tactical retreats, no more clever strategies. Her new strategy was simple and absolute: annihilation. She was going to meet the most powerful army in the world head-on, in a single, decisive confrontation. And she would not command from the rear. She would lead the charge herself, a whirlwind of vengeance at the heart of her army. According to Herodotus, what transpired next on the plains of Central Asia was one of the fiercest and bloodiest battles of the entire ancient world. He states with grim certainty that, in his opinion, it was the most violent combat ever fought between two non-Greek peoples. The two armies, the disciplined imperial forces of Persia and the furious nomadic host of the Massagetae, drew up against each other. The battle began, as was typical for the era, with an exchange of missile fire. For a long time, the armies stood their ground, raining arrows upon each other from a distance. The sky grew dark with the sheer volume of projectiles, the whistling of shafts a prelude to the slaughter. The renowned Persian archers fired in coordinated volleys, while the Massagetae, masters of the craft, answered with their own deadly storm from horseback. When their quivers were finally empty, they did not break. They dropped their bows, drew their weapons, and clashed. It was a brutal, desperate melee fought with spears, short swords, and daggers. The organized Persian infantry, accustomed to breaking their enemies with discipline and superior equipment, found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. The Massagetae, fighting for their queen who rode among them, for the freedom of their children, and to avenge their prince and their fallen comrades, fought with a desperate, suicidal fury that the professional soldiers of Persia, fighting for pay and plunder so far from home, simply could not handle. They fought like a people defending their very existence, their homeland, their identity. They gave no quarter and asked for none. Against all conceivable odds, the nomadic warriors of the steppes, powered by righteous rage, began to gain the upper hand. The meticulously drilled Persian lines, which had held firm against Medes, Lydians, and Babylonians, began to waver. Then they buckled. Then they broke. The tide of battle turned into a crimson torrent. The invincible Persian army was shattered, routed, and utterly annihilated. And somewhere in the maelstrom of dust, blood, and chaos, Cyrus the Great, the Shahanshah, the King of Kings, the light of the Aryans, was struck down and killed. The victory for the Massagetae was total, but Tomyris' vow was not yet complete. Her vengeance demanded one final, gruesome act. She ordered her soldiers to ignore the plunder and to search the bloody, corpse-strewn battlefield for the body of one man, Cyrus. When her warriors finally located his royal remains among the heaps of the slain, they brought the body to her. It was then that she fulfilled her terrible promise. She commanded them to bring her a wineskin, an item typically used for carrying water or milk. She had it filled not with wine, but with the blood of fallen Persian soldiers. With a cold, terrifying solemnity, she ordered them to sever Cyrus's head from his body. Taking the lifeless head by the hair, she delivered a declaration that would fascinate and horrify historians and artists for the next 2.5 millennia. She plunged Cyrus's head deep into the gore-filled wineskin, submerging it completely. "Though I live and have conquered you in this fight," she said, speaking to the dead king, "yet by you I am ruined, for you treacherously took my son with guile. But thus I make good my threat, and give you your fill of blood." While this dramatic, horrifying climax is the version of the story that has captured the human imagination for centuries, it is here that we must return to the complexities of history. Most modern historians believe that this dramatic ending, so perfectly symmetrical in its violent justice, is more powerful legend than literal fact. The core of Herodotus' story remains a testament to what the ancient world believed, but it is not the only account. Other ancient writers tell vastly different tales. Xenophon of Athens, in his work the Cyropaedia, a text that is more of a political treatise on the ideal ruler than a true history, claims Cyrus died peacefully of old age in his bed, surrounded by his family and advisors, dispensing wisdom to the very end. Another version comes from Ctesias, a Greek physician at the Persian court, whose own work survives only in fragments. He claims Cyrus died from a battle wound sustained fighting a people called the Dervises, who were aided by Indian allies with war elephants, and that in his version, the Persians were ultimately victorious. We may never know with absolute certainty how Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, truly met his end. The dust of the steppes has long since settled, and the truth is likely buried with it. But what we do know, without a doubt, is that the story of Tomyris as told by Herodotus became an immortal legend. In a world dominated by the stories of men and kings, she became a powerful and enduring symbol of strength, of righteous vengeance, and of the fierce, unyielding will of a leader protecting her people. For centuries after Herodotus put her tale to parchment, she was celebrated in Western art and literature. She appears in Dante's Purgatorio as an example of the punishment of pride. The great master Peter Paul Rubens painted the horrific climax of her story in a vast, dramatic canvas. She became an archetype, the barbarian queen who dared to defy the most powerful man in the civilized world and, in her story, emerged victorious. It is a powerful and necessary reminder from chronicles of old tales that history is not just written by the great kings and the grand empires, but also by the defiant leaders who stood against them, fighting not for glory or for conquest, but for the fundamental right to be free.